Hello and welcome to the Shepheard-Walwyn podcast series. My name is Jonathan Brown. Shepheard-Walwyn is a campaigning book publisher based in London, England. Our purpose is to uncover and promote new ideas to society's oldest problems. And whilst our specialty is ethical economics, something Anthony Werner, our driving force for over 40 years, has pioneered, we have branched out over the years to other related areas such as the environment and the lives and works of society's change agents. These podcasts promote ideas we're convinced can actually help us build a better society for all of us. So have a listen and be sure to share with your friends if you like them, but also tell us what you think. These are debates we all need to be part of. Today we welcome back Edi Bilimoria to the podcast to talk about the second volume of his stunning work, Unfolding Consciousness. Now, as a quick recap, Edi is an award-winning engineer, glider pilot, concert pianist, philosopher and lifetime student of the ancient wisdom, the perennial philosophy. Now, Book 2 is the shortest volume in the series, so I've presented this conversation in one instalment. But in many ways, it could be the most impactful for the reader, as it puts us beings under the microscope. And in just over 200 densely packed pages, Edi manages to integrate almost all of the wisdom traditions in one breathtaking, coherent picture. And this could be the most extraordinary intellectual feat I've ever experienced. As an interviewer of the Shepheard-Walwyn podcast, I always strive to remain as objective as possible, and yet increasingly I find that impossible with Edi's work, because it's slowly changing my whole worldview. So if you have an interest in the area that Edi covers, I guarantee he will shake your view in the politest yet most thorough way you can imagine. So my invitation is to listen to the interviews in this series, but then to buy the books and take a year or two to digest them. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. Edi, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
So Edi, we've gone through book 1, and today we're going to be focusing on book 2, volume 2, which is Peering Down the Microscope, Man's Internal Landscapes. So I just wonder if you could just give us a little bit on the context of carrying on from book 1 and what's the purpose of book 2.
Yes, surely. The overall context, Jonathan, as we see on the slipcase, is that while we sincerely applaud the achievements of science and technology, there is still a spiritual vacuum that's been created as a result of excessive materialism. And that vacuum has been so effectively highlighted by great people like Carl Jung, who wrote the book Modern Man in Search of a Soul, and Paul Brunton, The Spiritual Crisis of Man. So the raison d'etre is to show that the perennial philosophy, the spiritual philosophy, the esoteric science provides that missing complement, which in association with science gives us a rounded picture of the whole world and ourselves in it. So the purpose is to highlight the central role of the perennial philosophy as a complement to science.
So looking at this, Edi, and looking at book 2, the thing that amazed me as someone that was, I guess, an atheist in recovery or something like that, of gradually through my life gradually becoming more open to the spiritual side of life. What absolutely amazed me was the degree of what I can only describe as scientific research and conclusions that have come through the perennial philosophy that has been utterly missing in modern Western society, and we've just been left with this utterly unsophisticated and basic view of God, as if it's some kind of potentially vengeful Father Christmas, when actually the whole philosophy of that you explore in the book, the philosophy of perennials, gives us so much more detail. So I'm very keen that we can get into that today, really.
Yes, surely.
So that when you book 1 started, volume 1 started with who or what am I, and followed by the rejoinder, man, know thyself. I'm just wondering what's it like, again, just why you're focusing on the individual there.
I'm focusing on the individual for two reasons, really, so that we really know ourselves, of course, but more importantly, so that we know ourselves in relation to other human beings, in relation to nature, and in relation to the universe as a whole. So one of the, or I'd say three of the unique features of volumes 1, 2, and 3, but 2 especially, is that science, religion, philosophy are all subsumed, they're all swept under the grand arch of the perennial philosophy. And the great teachings are absolutely universal, whether from the East or from the West, whether ancient or modern, they are universal, they convey a central message, and they help to resolve many of the conundrums in science, especially regarding the whole subject of consciousness.
Now, one of the fascinating things is that you shared was some data from NASA's science newsletter.
Yes.
I just wonder, I'm just wondering, has modern science finally come to the conclusion that they need to embrace occult science?
Sadly, no. Modern science as a body, no. I would say that with a certain amount of sad confidence. Many scientists have indeed done so, especially in the Galileo Commission of the Scientific Medical Network. One great scientist who has is, of course, Erwin Laszlo. They wouldn't call it occult science, of course, but they urgently and desperately see the need for a post-materialist science, which is not, I again emphasize, it is not castigating material science in its proper place, but it's seeing the need to move beyond. Bernard Carr in the Scientific and Medical Network, the president, many great scientists who were in the Theosophical Society and then also in the Scientific and Medical Network, Peter Leggett, who was Vice Chancellor of Surrey University, Arthur Ellison, who was thrice president of the Society for Psychical Research. So there are luminaries individually, but the body of science, absolutely not, Jonathan. And as a little example of how they are completely wedded to a materialistic explanation or explain away, I read with some horror in molecular biology that they have discovered that the reason we love our grandchildren is thanks to gonorrhea, the disease that occurred several generations ago. Therefore, by virtue of such mutation and genetic progressions, we sort of need to love our grandchildren. And if you think I'm exaggerating, this is an academic paper. Now, we immediately would ask ourselves, why not love our children? Why our grandchildren? What about our parents? What about our friends? So it is ludicrous to put the love of grandchildren down to gonorrhea. And I can provide this reference.
I think it would be time that none of us will get back. I think that the thing that also as well, just some of my areas, I just see more and more scientific papers that are more and more blindingly obvious. But there was some data that you quoted on in the introduction in the NASA newsletter, saying that according to their conclusions, the universe is made up of 5% of baryonic matter, yes. That's normal matter that we would all recognize as matter. But then that leaves 95% of what they're estimated 68% dark energy and 27% dark matter, which is the stuff that we didn't know existed until very recently.
Yes. So unless we are outside the universe somehow, some of that approximately 95% of matter, so to speak, must also constitute our being and the being of other creatures.
And that the extra 95% is something that we've only recently, or scientists have only recently discovered.
Mm.
And yet they know next to nothing about it.
Yeah.
And we have an imperfect understanding of the 5% that we do know exists.
Exactly. And they pontificate on that basis.
Yeah, so if I only knew a bit about 5% of my field, then I think I'd have more humility. Personally.
Indeed.
I'm just thinking about getting into our dialogue now.
Mm-hmm.
Just about the whole area around of man, know thyself.
Mm.
I just wonder, why have we got so confused about
ourselves,
who and what we are?
Mm. Well, the philosophical answer, if it be an answer, is that we become so fascinated with our image, our self-image. And on our first podcast, I think I gave you the example or the story of the Greek myth of the god Bacchus, who was torn to pieces by the giant Titans, who then scattered the body of the god far and wide. But Jupiter, the god of Bacchus, hurled his thunderbolt and reduced the scattered body of the Titans to ashes. And from the ashes, the body of man was created. But because the ashes contained a portion of the Bacchic body, each person is part god, Bacchus, and part Titan. Now, how did the giants ensnare the god? By getting him to be fascinated with his own image in a mirror. So the sort of top level answer to your question, I believe, is that self-fascination, confusing self with appearance, mistaking the map for the territory, confusing thought concepts with that which has produced the concept. And other reasons are the society we live in, the fascination with technology, with excessive technology, and with just about everything that distracts you from your own self-knowledge and self-awareness.
And the idea that we're as a Western society, we're recreating the great myths of all becoming self-obsessed with our own reflections, and our own, as you were saying, confusing your appearance with who you are. I mean, it's a quietly terrifying prospect, really, isn't it?
One only has to look at the current political scene and how television and performance counts for everything. And the three guidelines for a future leader put forward by a senior conservative, I believe, was, well, a serious mind, yes, high-end media skills, and electioneering skills and success. What about character? What about leadership? What about quality of thought? None of that seems to figure. It's how you appear, how you come across.
Yeah. Now, so on a more positive note, so instead of this vision of human beings as hackable animals or bags of atoms, you have there's a wonderful quote that you have in from Hamlet of what a piece of work is man.
Yes.
How noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and moving, how express and admirable in action, how like an angel in apprehension, how like a god. And you add that with Schrodinger's which seems to lead to the ideas from the Vedas, or the key truth of thou art that. And so the perennial philosophy suggests that we're on the way to becoming gods. And as you use the analogy there, or the allegory of the story, I just wondered if you can expand a little bit on that.
The Vedas are quite unequivocally pointing out that in your deepest self, you are one with the divine consciousness. Now, Schrödinger, in his book, I think, What is Life, quite clearly said that the deepest, most profound conclusion of the Vedas is Atma equals Brahman. In other words, the individual self equals the universal self. But then this begs the question, if I am the universal self, how is there so much evil and suffering in the world and all the rest of it? And that is because people confuse levels. So what applies at the highest level does not apply when that level descends, so to speak, into materiality.
But I think we'll be getting into that in a little while, won't we? And I just want, just before we get into it, I've got a friend who is into the theosophical insight, and she was telling me that when Madame Blavatsky did her research and then wrote the books,
right?
She was saying that some information had to be given out in a veiled way, so
yes,
that only those who possessed the esoteric key could unlock the inner meaning. And I just wondered, what are your thoughts on publishing and being so clearly publishing these teachings in 2022?
Right. The teachings were given out through Blavatsky in a progressive manner, and the highest teachings were reserved for the esoteric section and the inner group. Now, why were these teachings given out in the first place? And there is a beautiful saying of one of the adept founders, one of the masters, that between brutal materialism and religious superstition, the white dove of truth knows not where to place her weary foot. So in the 19th century, there was an explosion in science, in material science, and there was also no end of religious superstition. So trapped between Scylla and Charybdis, so to speak, the white dove of truth doesn't know where to place her weary foot. So the central purpose of giving out these teachings then was to show where the white dove of truth could put her foot down. But in order to do that, there is the great question of freeing the mind from the weight of prejudice and opinion in science, and also freeing the mind from no end of religious, small r, superstition. Therefore, the teachings were given out progressively and explained in a stepwise fashion, as far as possible and whenever possible, corroborating those teachings and furnishing those teachings with the explanations from modern science, compatible with the intellectual and cultural milieu of the time. Now, why dangerous? Because anything that unfolds our inner powers can be misused. So even at the most basic physical level, the more we develop our muscles, say our hands and legs, we can use those muscles constructively, or we can use those muscles destructively to fight with people. Similarly, our inner faculties of consciousness can be thoroughly misused and abused when teachings are given out that are not right for the time and display too much information for the unprepared. And the overriding danger is derangement and a loss of the mental faculty by virtue of forces evoked in the mind when one is not prepared or unprepared with insufficient willpower to handle everything that is being evoked.
And your feeling of why it's okay to do it now?
Well, yeah, it is. Well, it's okay, definitely, to do it now because it's the pressure of evolution that has called it forth, so to speak. So there's another lovely saying which I'll paraphrase, that occult science drops its pearls only very far and wide apart, and only when forced to do so by the evolutionary pressure, because, pearls to swine analogy, those pearls which are blessings in the hands of the wise, used philanthropically, can become curses in the hands of the unwise. And it's all right to do it now, but only a part of those teachings. But only a fraction of the teachings have been given out, Jonathan, not the whole teachings. But even that fraction becomes necessary to arrest the march of scientific materialism.
And just finally on that, the point about Blavatsky is that I know that you say that she didn't work to create a religion,
Indeed not.
but rather just to share the wisdom of theosophy as a living power in our lives.
Yeah.
What do you say to those who do claim that theosophy begins and ends with her and her work?
Well, I would say very forcefully, you just haven't understood it, because in chapter 1, actually, I talk about one of the dangers in the subject on terminology. There are minds, unfortunately, who only like to work in dichotomies. It's black or white. And Blavatsky herself said, and I've quoted that as a body of knowledge, theosophy has nothing to say and nothing to teach, meaning that there are other approaches. And the second object of the Theosophical Society is the comparative study of science, religion, and philosophy. Annie Besant, the great second international president, made it very clear that the teachings do not start or end with Blavatsky. The General Council resolution of the Theosophical Society, the International Council, one of their resolutions is that no man has any right to force teachings down anyone's throat and claim that Blavatsky is the only teacher to be respected and followed. She followed in the stream of wisdom teachings. So to those who say that Blavatsky is the ultimate, that shows, if I may say so, an intellectual weakness and a desire not to understand and to be very comfortable in just one set of mental concepts. It is a very sad misunderstanding. She would be the very first person to say, explore, carry on. Don't take what I say for granted. Find out for yourself.
And that's really where the whole series begins, isn't it? With
Yes.
chapter 1 of book 1, which is and trust yourself and learn to trust yourself more and more through experimentation and reflection and your own research.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
The best musical example is Bach. Every musician on earth reveres Bach, but to say all music starts and ends with Bach would be talking rubbish, and no musician would ever say that. What they would say, that the wonderful foundations established by Johann Sebastian Bach were taken forward by others, by Handel, by Mozart, by Beethoven, Chopin, revered Bach, took it forward. So I wrote a paper some time ago saying back to Blavatsky or forwards with Blavatsky. It's forwards with Blavatsky.
Brilliant. Well, moving on then. So one of the first maybe misconceptions we can get is if we're putting forward the argument that we are all one, we're all spiritual beings. Where does evil and cruelty come from then? If we're all spiritual? Everything
comes from the source, but we tend to regard the source as terribly loving and kind and spiritual. There is that dreadful bifurcation where, if you take the example of a fruit from a tree, it's pure fruit and then it turns extremely rotten, doesn't it? Now, why does it turn rotten? It's within the fruit itself to turn rotten or to stay pure. So evil is really the corruption of the spiritual rather than an independent principle. It is the corruption of the spiritual, and that which is most pure can easily be corrupted.
Well, then moving on to that what can be corrupted. In the first chapter, you cover and clarify the composition of man, constitution, nature. Can you explain briefly what they are and what the difference is?
Yes, constitution is how we are made, and nature is how we function. In medical terms, it's the distinction and the overlap between anatomy and physiology. So your anatomy is your structure, but as a result of your structure, it will determine your nature. You can only act as you are made. You are made in order to act in a certain way. So one is the static dimension, the other is the dynamic aspect.
Right. Can you expand on that a bit more, Eddie? I don't think I fully understood that.
Right. You can look at anything in terms of an active principle, and its form. Now, the active principle is what drives anything. The form is the medium and the expression and the body that's needed to be so driven. So your nature is how you behave, how you act, but you only act in that way as a result of how you are made, how you are put together.
Yeah. So that I can only express the active principles in me through the form that I've got, or the form that I have shapes and forms the active principle.
Right. Right. This distinction between the active and the passive medium is very important. And let me give some examples. Active and passive are relative terms. In order to make a violin, you need wood. The wood is the form that is built up into the shape of the violin. But the violin doesn't play itself. For the violin to create music, you need the violinist, the active principle, and then the violin is the passive medium that creates the music. In terms of growing a plant, the seed is the active principle, the soil is the medium which then grows the plant when the two come together. So in metaphysical terms, spirit and matter, spirit is the active principle and matter is the passive medium for the expansion of spirit.
So are you saying then that effectively, so my spirit is actually, so if I was, my spirit is a violinist, so to speak, and my body is a violin.
Right.
Is that correct? To take that analogy. So actually, so I'm a spirit inside my own instrument.
In terms of that analogy, it's a good one, because the entire human body has been likened to a musical instrument that is played upon by the inner spirit. And the veena is a beautiful Indian instrument where the frets are constructed according to the bones of the human spine. The sperm, the active principle, interacting with the egg, produces the embryo. Yeah. Consciousness now, through the brain, results in thought. The violinist with a violin creates music. So there are always these two principles in coexistence for any production, for any productive purpose. But sorry, I was interrupting you. You said you made
no, because what it is when you talk about, seeing the body as a musical instrument. I know in the book you mentioned some stuff from the Institute of Heart Math and Heart Rate Variability.
Yes, that's very good.
And we can get to that, but I know it. So you can literally change the frequency and the resonance inside your own body by your own actions, right? Whether that's rhythmical breathing or the effective emotions, and it all changes your your electromagnetic composition.
Yes.
So it's so fascinating stuff on that. So we're moving into some incredibly detailed and deep stuff. So there was one comment that you in chapter 2 in around the constitution of man. You talk about the is it buddhi being
the intuition principle? Yes.
And so what's the difference between buddhi and hunches? And also, would you also include imagination in this?
Right. Hunches are, let's say, the dregs of buddhi. Buddhi is the faculty of direct knowing without the engagement of the mind, of direct perception, so you're not working things out. Now, starting with Atma, the divine self, Atma can't contact the physical body directly. It needs to work through an intermediary, rather like transformers in an electrical power station down to the consumer unit. So Atma, so to speak, projects buddhi as the platform called the upadhi in Sanskrit. So Atma and buddhi are known as the monad, the eternal principle, which in conjunction with the higher mind is the reincarnation, not the lower quaternary.
So people be aware of what in common, in self-help language is mind, body, spirit, or body, mind, spirit.
Right.
And what you focus on is body, soul, spirit.
Yes. Mind is another word. Mind as psyche.
And so I just wanted to say, could you take us through is parts an appropriate word to use for that? Are they the parts of man or the parts of the being?
Or the principles of man?
Principles. Yeah, sure. Okay.
Right, whatever. Well, soul is this uncomfortable term, and it's often confused with spirit, and it's not spirit. So whenever a higher and a lower principle come together, there has to be an interface, and the interface is soul. So in terms of a analogy with a corporation or a company, if we regard the chief executive as spirit and the shop floor as the workers, well, the chief executive doesn't direct the workers, he works through the management. And there is management at various levels. But it's in the nature of management at the higher end. I don't mean higher and lower in a pejorative sense. It's in the nature of management at the higher end to talk to the chief executive so that the vision of the executive can be translated into tools to work with to then direct the shop floor. So in this analogy, the middle management is the soul. So at the highest levels of soul, it touches spirit. That's the spiritual soul. At the lower level, it's the animal soul, because it informs the body, which is of animal descent. The intermediary is the human soul.
And so what we've got, so we've got the spirit, which is all connected to universal intelligence, universal unfolding, universal consciousness. So then the receiving or the agent on earth to communicate and explore that consciousness is the soul, and that then ideally would instruct or guide the body to do good work and to create the positive intentions that consciousness has on earth. Is that right? And so if let's just take this analogy of the factory and the chief exec. So let's just say we've got an absent or uncontactable chief executive.
Right.
The management is dysfunctional, or they're away as well. Then all we've got left is the people on our people on the shop floor.
Yes, and they wouldn't know what to do, and they would probably indulge in fairly destructive acts.
And I guess if we're absent enough, then they'll form their own system of management and leadership. But it's only on the level that they're at. There isn't any higher wisdom coming in about what direction should we do. So to creating fantastic tools and then great product. But the question is, if that's not connected to a higher purpose or a greater intention, then either the products will be of little or no worth, or they'll have destructive properties because they're not being guided by a higher intelligence. Which metaphorically we've had of our chief executive. And I guess also just to make sure the listeners are aware, we are assuming that in this organization, before the chief executive and the management disappeared, they were worthy of the positions that they were meant to be in.
The chief executive here is always worthy. But
and so that really, so on your the constitution from the occult, you've got the Atma is the divine self. Then next to that, you're coming down is Buddhi, and that's the communicating, almost like a Wi-Fi connection. There cannot be a direct connection between that level of energy and coming into what's increasingly physical being.
Yes, and I've shown the diagram of a power station and consumers at the end.
And I know
I think a useful one.
And whereas a lot of listeners will be familiar with body, mind, spirit, you talk about here about something called manas, which is a mind principle, which is and you got higher and lower.
Yes, that is an absolutely central teaching of the perennial philosophy of all cultures, really, and I've shown that very clearly in the chapter on the unity of the various religions, chapter 8, I think. And Ian McGilchrist's wonderful work, The Master and His Emissary, and his latest 2 volumes, The Matter with Things, has again shown this distinction in his terms between left brain and right brain, emphasizing that we haven't got 2 separate brains. The brain is plastic. The distinction is not what the 2 hemispheres do, but how they do it and to what purpose, to what end. So Ian McGilchrist has wonderfully, as far as I'm concerned, corroborated the ancient wisdom, and a great saying in the Theosophical Society is science is our best ally. And Ian McGilchrist has been our best ally. Through philosophy and psychiatry, he has shown that we can use our mind in two ways. Now, the higher mind, the lower mind, Plato openly wrote in Timaeus that when the soul, psyche, general term, it has a choice. It can either ally itself, become friendly with nous, the wisdom, in which case all is well, or it can attach itself to anoia, known as the irrational soul, and create problems for itself. One of the tarot cards, and I've shown that in volume 3, shows the youth flanked by two maidens on either side. And they both love him. One maiden is vice, the other maiden is virtue. And the point is, they both love him, but the youth has to choose where he's going to put his eggs, in which basket, so to speak. So therefore, this mind principle is absolutely crucial. The double nature of the mind principle, not two separate minds, but we can either attach ourselves to our desires and our lower nature, and we call it kama manas, kama desire, manas mind, or we can rise to ally ourselves, not attach, become allies with buddhi, in which case we call it buddhi manas. And that which reincarnates is atma buddhi and higher manas. That is the spiritual nature. The terrestrial nature, the personality, is finished. You know, it's terrestrial, it's of the earth, it disintegrates. But the higher nature seeks new material to express its ongoing potential.
Yes. And so really that, I mean, and looking at this, the diagram was, and the distinction, so the buddhi principle and atma, but also, you know, more practically on my side, just the whole thing about higher and lower mind, is when I was watching a self-help video, and the guy was saying, imagine what you'd like to create or like to do, and that's essentially that, you know, the whole thing around the secret, right, is positive manifestation. But then he said, and it also helps if you write it down. He said, I don't know why that is, but if you write it down, it tends to be more likely to come true. And what he was expressing really was if you're really going into this, is that let's say you meditate or you imagine a great future, is you're actually connecting with your buddhi, you know, your intuition, but the spiritual intuition, and then bringing it into your mind, or your soul, and then by writing it out, you start to create a physical manifestation of the imagination that you've just had. Is that right?
That is such good advice, Jonathan. To express your thoughts in concretion by writing it down, not by typing it into a computer. I always physically write things down first, then flesh it out on the computer. There is a natural relationship between the mind and the hand. So writing it down is vital. It focuses the mind, obviously, but it also earths, in terms of the electrical analogy again, it earths the current from the source to the receiver. So when you've written it down, you've earthed it. And by bringing it into physical manifestation, you can then work with it. But now, talking again about intuition, there's so many different words. John Keats used this wonderful term, negative capability. And John Keats was the great romantic poet, and he was so disillusioned by the Industrial Revolution and all the grime and noise he saw. And he said, just by sitting down quietly and trusting the higher power, you will be gifted with inspiration. Not every day, of course, but he called it negative capability. So that's another aspect of intuition.
So what was a negative capability in that then?
Well, what's negative is you're not starting with a seed idea. You're not starting with a concept.
Right. But
It's
why
negative.
so?
It's negative in the sense that you've got a blank, not a blank, but a sheet of white paper with nothing scribbled on it.
Right. So to start with, be willing to start with nothing physical, so that there's space for
You
the
create the
idea that
plenum. The
nature
plenum.
abhors a vacuum, right? So
Yeah,
if you allow space for nature or for body
yeah,
intuition or Atma to
yeah.
come in,
That's right.
then it will, right?
That's right.
No, I was just thinking just about what you were saying about the Industrial Revolution and how it was so affected by it.
Mm,
Um, I know if you actually, and one of the things when you look at the separation that's happened, and there's other authors in Shepheard-Walwyn that have tackled this, of just this isolating effect
yes.
of what's so-called what we describe as progress, which for in many ways is an obscenity, isn't it? Really, to
It
describe
is.
that as progress, because
Yeah.
it's again it's mechanical or physical progress, but actually in terms of a relational connection to something bigger than ourselves. Is if we were living in a in a village and working on the land, I don't believe that anyone who truly understands gardening and gardens is that they can't deny the existence of a higher intelligence, because the miracle of just a small, even a blade of grass, the way that grows
Oh, absolutely
and
true.
creates,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it's just that separation. What happened with the Industrial Revolution was that people lost connection to the majesty of nature, right? Because, and again, physically, you didn't get to see anything other than the stars, and they were clouded by the fog and by the the nasty smoke coming out of the factories.
Yes. Because of the explosion in mechanical knowledge, the next step was to say nature and we are machines, are just to be mechanized.
Yes, and
Yeah.
the idea that it's as simple as that. I mean, it's just
And as
ridiculous.
Schrodinger said, we do not belong to the world that science constructs for us. Science puts things in a very orderly, classified manner, but that is the model, that's the map, and it's very necessary. But we confuse the map with the territory.
So Eddie, what I'll do is I'll put the I'll put this diagram on the screen so people can see it.
Sure.
But going down, you also have, so going down below lower mind, you have
I've got the same diagram, I think, Jonathan. If I don't have it, then do put it up. But sorry, going down, yeah.
yeah. So just I was wondering if you could explain the is it karma,
Desire. Yeah.
and prana, and I just
Yeah.
wanted, so the desire principle, and
Yeah.
that's been, so are we not supposed to have desires to evolve?
Desires are wonderful. And I have a wonderful quotation to counter this idea that all desires are evil. Far from it. Desire at its higher level is the power of expressing love. Desire is central. But what are you doing with your desires? And there's nothing wrong with personal desires. If your personal desires of your personal well-being and your relationship, it's very important. It's desires that run away with themselves and become the end all and be all at the expense of others. So I was reading only last week a very fine article on MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. And I was thinking to myself, my goodness, the contrast between the Saudi monarchy and our monarchy. Now, if you read his desires to create the dream city, 500 billion would be the cost, the ruthless way in which he gets rid of the opposition. This is desire for power. It's quite different from desires turned towards a philanthropic purpose.
Well, I guess that's really, you're going back to to the spirit, if the desire is at least influenced or shaped by the spirit into the soul and the higher mind, and that then is where you get the positive desires, isn't it? And it helps you, genuinely helps you and others.
Desire as self-indulgence, self-aggrandizement at the expense of others, which is so prevalent nowadays, which is the thing to guard against. The story of the two wolves, asking grandson asked grandfather, I've got two wolves in me, which one do I feed? Well, the one you feed is the one who grows in you. So if you have self-indulgent ideas and you want just to satisfy your own desires, you're feeding that wolf, that'll grow in you. So if you're feeding the other wolf, the philanthropic and the higher mind, that's what will grow in you. So what you place your mind on will grow.
Well, and if we're all parts of one whole, then I'm an expression of the whole in a certain. I'm a certain mix of the whole. So I've got a purpose, and so in that sense, if I act out that purpose, then it can't not benefit other people, right? And I guess maybe that's the thing: is yes, it benefits me, but also it has to benefit others. Otherwise, it can't be my purpose, because why would I want to destroy myself, other than if I was mentally ill, right?
Absolutely. So if you're in a traffic jam and you act and you drive in a courteous and gracious way, the whole system will improve and you will improve with it. But if you drive aggressively, you might get ahead for 2 or 3 minutes, but then the whole system will snarl up. So what benefits your purpose will undoubtedly benefit humanity. And all the great composers have proven that, and all the great artists and poets and religious teachers, of course.
Do you have anything to say about prana?
Prana, yes, the life principle, which is otherwise known as Fu in Japan and Qi in the Chinese Tai Chi. Prana is what circulates around the etheric body, which is the model body, which is the template of the physical body. And it's the vital principle, which if only medical science were more attuned to that idea, they wouldn't be talking of vaccinations and other toxins, if I may put it that way, that degrade our vital principle, even though temporarily they may give you physical immunity. The word prana is also strongly associated with the breath. So one enhances the vitality by breathing practices, by eating the right food, obviously fresh and organic, and minimizing any situation that depletes your energies.
They're fantastic.
But pranic healing, which is well known, which is energetic healing, is the infusion of the healer's own vitality into the client, into the patient, if it's depleted. And one of the nefarious ways of attacking someone psychically is to, so to speak, tear holes in the etheric body so it leaks prana. So if the vital body is fragmented, the circulation of prana is inhibited. And you find that story graphically told in one of Dion Fortune's books, Psychic Self-Protection. Now, what does that fragmentation? One of the things I find most difficult to cope with is constant repetition. And that's a very well-known way of breaking someone down.
Can you give an example of that?
Well, yeah, actually, the live example in, Dion Fortune, the great writer, her other name was Violet Johnson, and she was a leading light in the Western occult tradition. She was attacked by the warden, by the head of the agricultural college, where she was working, looking after the poultry section. And the way that attack was conducted was the warden only repeated these two phrases: "You are weak and you know it, you have no self-confidence and you have got to admit it." And she repeated that hundreds and hundreds of times. Now, you would say, come on, if someone's repeating it, you say, "You silly idiot," and just leave. But no, the whole point is by using the eyes in a certain way, one captures the individual in the same way as a snake will ensnare a bird. And by capturing that person and repeating something over and over again, you break down the vital body, the etheric body, which by virtue then of leaking prana will result in a total nervous collapse.
And I guess if we're doing it to ourselves, if we have negative tracks running in our minds, then that's going to do the same thing.
Yes, right? It does. It weakens the vital body, which inhibits the circulation of the vital energy. Amazing. Very, very good example. Yeah. It can be done unconsciously, but when done with real knowledge, it's doubly dangerous.
And I guess that's also the incessant nature of propaganda in our authoritarian society.
Very good example. It's a very good example. It's propaganda, and the obverse of that is positive self-affirmation.
Yes. Yeah. And I know something else as well is I was reading about what violent communist states used to do. And they used to make people say things and repeat things that they knew to be false.
Yeah.
And they knew to be nonsense. And that had an even worse effect than it would, wouldn't it? If it was known to be untrue and you had to repeat it, and that again just takes away your life.
Break it down even more.
Amazing.
And that's happening, we're told, to the poor Uyghur Muslims in China.
Right. Well, and just so moving on to there's a wonderful quote from Paul Brunton, which reiterating that man is a miniature copy of the universe. I just wonder if you can explain in layman's terms what that means.
Yes, well, it goes on to say all the forces and powers that have made the universe have made you. Well, we're not talking of Big Bang cosmology here. We're talking of the various hidden and non-material influences and powers known as elementals, known as gods with an S, the various powers in nature. So the cosmic elements, so-called, are the non-material equivalent of the physical elements. So the purest element is Akasha, of course, which is the storehouse of all our thoughts and deeds. But that being the highest element, all the other elements are subsets or aspects of Akasha. So how is a plant, how does a plant get, how is it produced? What happens to the seed? It needs sunlight, it needs water. It's the same with the human being. It needs the equivalent of sunlight and water.
Now, one of the things that we've used, we see the term ego used in the eternal wisdom, and it means something quite different than it does in general understanding.
Yes.
I just wonder if you could define the word ego through esoteric understanding.
This is an unfortunate use of the English language. You find that fine distinction in Sanskrit. It's no problem. Ego with a small e is the personal desire nature, the lower mind and lower desires, which literally blocks the light from the higher self. Now, ego with a capital E means the association of the mind principle with whatever we're talking about. So the human, we call it ego to distinguish from ego. The human ego is the association of the mind principle. So there's the distinction between saying, I am, and I am Jonathan, or I'm anything else. And I know that I am Jonathan. That's when the mind principle comes in. It's not just an abstract I know, I am. I know that I am.
You explain man functioning through three souls. And you explain the second one as a human soul, has divine essence, aka actual location of God within. And if left unsolved, survives into immortality. Could you explain that?
The human soul is the higher mind, the higher manos.
Ah, right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. And then you talk as well about the bridge.
That is vital, and I've got a nice diagram to explain that. But before that, let me say that some people object to the use of the word man. Now, man does not mean male as opposed to female. The word man etymologically comes from men, the thinker, in Sanskrit, manas, to think, to cogitate. So man is the philosophical term for the thinker, be it or be man, male or female. There's nothing to do with gender. So the bridge, that's vital, called the antakarana, and it means literally the interior instrument. And it is the vehicle of consciousness whereby all the spiritual thoughts, all the altruistic thoughts and desires of a person are, so to speak, transmuted to the higher nature. The best way to look at it is an umbilical cord. An umbilical cord between the parent and the child. The parent, the higher nature, the higher self, the child, its personality. In astronaut terms, it's the umbilical connection between the mothership and the astronaut walking in space. But the umbilical cord feeds nutrients and oxygen and all that. And if that cord is severed, well, good luck to you. But there are people, by virtue of their extreme evil and brutality, have severed that connection. And then you have the phenomenon known as soulless men, S-O-U-L-L-E-S-S, soulless men, described by Robert Louis Stevenson allegorically in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In rare circumstances, when one is fully enlightened, you don't need a bridge anymore because you're always operating from the higher self. But if you prematurely chop the bridge, then you can expect a lot of trouble.
And what can we do to strengthen our connection, or to improve our bridge then?
Well, literally, prayer, meditation, brutal self-examination, understanding one's motives, really understanding what you have done to others, and therefore trying to make amends, charity work, anything that enhances the higher spiritual nature.
Mm.
You just think of an electrical wire and the currents flowing down the wire to whatever. So I've called it man's spiritual life support, the umbilical connection. Okay, so the Sanskrit word is antakarana, the internal instrument, interior sense organ, and it's that medium of connection between the higher self, the individuality as parent, with the lower self, the personality, its child. And its function is, as I said, to act as a bridge and umbilical connection. Now, importantly, at death, it acts as the conveyor of all thoughts of a spiritual nature during the personal life that can be absorbed into the higher self. And spiritual aspirations are absorbed, nothing of the personal life. So you can't take your private yacht and your jets with you, or your palace and your mansions and all of that. That will come to an end. It's only your spiritual and higher aspirations. So billionaires, please note. Now, for the average man, the average person, let's look at the connection between the higher self and the child as this electrical conduit. Lots of wires twisted together. Now, what happens if you sever one of the wires? The same current from the higher self to the child, personality, the same current has got to be conveyed by fewer wires. So the wires are going to heat up. So if you then carry on living in a cruel and evil way, you will thin this connection. And if you carry on like that, you will sever that connection ultimately. Conversely, by living the good life, the holy life, the altruistic life, the philanthropic life, and this is the Jekyll and Hyde, soulless men, a human monster and a scourge. Conversely, we can strengthen the connection. So instead of the current flowing down through fewer wires and heating up the wire and then finally breaking the connection, we can add more wires, so to speak. And there we have the sage, the seer, and the genius in any field. Now, conventional psychiatry and psychology really, I would say, knows nothing about the real mechanisms of soulless men and human monsters. There are enough examples in the world, but how this happens is little known, and it is only occult science that provides the missing link of understanding.
So on death, the Jekyll and Hyde, the person that's made the successively increasingly evil or negative choices,
right?
Their soul still, the spirit returns, but
right. In that situation, there is an almost immediate reincarnation because there is no after-death state in which to reap the reward of good deeds and good thoughts on earth. So when that connection is severed, there is an almost immediate incarnation again as a human monster, and progressively carrying on that line till there is complete destruction.
Wow. And I guess that so by strengthening our relationship between the I'd say the higher self and the lower self,
yes,
we get access to more. I guess there's more buddy.
Yes, precisely so. Yes,
and so
precisely. Yeah, exactly.
Great. And I guess that could be why certain people can become so productive, is to have an incredible connection to the universal intelligence.
Exactly, to there, yes.
Right, fantastic.
you were talking about the ego earlier, so this diagram should help. We are, of course, one human territory, but there are many ways in which we can look at ourselves, many, as I say, anatomical maps. So as one unified being, we can look at ourselves, and indeed we are, the higher self, the individuality, which is incorruptible, and the personality, the lower self, which is corruptible. Why don't I get a laser pointer? Much better. Right. And as I said earlier, this interface between the higher and the lower results in, this interface is the soul in generic terms. And we can unpack this soul nature in this way. The higher self comprising the divine self and its vehicles of expression, buddhi and manas. And manas, the mind principle, as we said, can act in two ways. It can associate with buddhi, or it can attach itself to kama, the desire body. So we have the divided mind in Ian McGilchrist terms, and also in terms of the perennial philosophy. So we can rise in our minds to associate with the god Bacchus, Nous, or we can attach ourselves to the giant titans and display the qualities of the irrational soul. So it's our choice whether to be the Minotaur of Cretan mythology or to be one with the stars. And so we display a spectrum of consciousness, which I need hardly explain, from ineffable transcendence to absolutely unspeakable brutality. Now, just thinking of the Cretan story of Theseus entering the labyrinth to slay the Minotaur, he was given a ball of string as a clue. Now, the ancient word for string was clue, C-L-E-W, which is interesting. One end of the string was held by Princess Ariadne, who fell in love with the youth. And then as he unwound the string into the labyrinth and killed the Minotaur, he was able to find his way out. Now, what is the symbology behind this beautiful story? Of course, the Minotaur, the head of a bull and on a body of a man, shows the ungoverned passions and brutality of, well, the brutal man. Princess Ariadne, holding the ball of string, the end of the string, symbolizes the spiritual soul, which then unravels the string, the higher mind, so that it is always in contact with the youth Theseus, and there's always that connection between the personality, the mind, and the spiritual soul. But if Ariadne let go of the string, then poor Theseus wouldn't find his way out of the labyrinth. And what is the labyrinth in this? It is our earth life, with all its twists and turns, where we have to develop the capacity to recognize and associate with our higher self using our mind. What's the ego? It's this excessive attachment and connection between the lower mind and the desires that blocks the light coming through. So this is one of Robert Browning's beautiful poems, Three Souls Which Make Up One Soul. What does, what knows, what is. I emphasize in the volumes periodically that the great artists and poets knew far more about the human being, even though they knew very little about the human body. Now, what I mean is the scientists and the doctors know a great deal about the human body, and of course they need to. But the human being who functions through that body, many of them seem to know nothing about, because you can't understand the human being by looking at a dead body or just the body. You understand the human being by interacting with it. And this is what the great artists and poets and great religious people and philosophers have done. They've displayed and understood the human being, as indeed did Mozart in his operas. He knew all about the behavior of men and women, even though I doubt if he knew anything about how to dissect the brain. So 3 souls. How do we make a house? This is an example of as above, so below. We make a house, we create the foundation, and then the roof structure, and then that's not enough. We need to have internal stories, internal foundations. The lowest level is the animal soul, then the human soul, and then the spiritual soul, the 3 souls that Robert Browning talked about. And in a more sophisticated taxonomy, they can be correlated to the septenary constitution, like this. How do we function? The difference between our nature and our constitution, as we spoke earlier. Again, Browning's quotation, the power station and the domestic consumers, the domestic houses. But we need transformers to step down the power, in popular terms, the current and voltage, from the high level at the power station to what a domestic house would use, because otherwise it would blow all your light bulbs. So you need 3 transformers. The physical body is the domestic house. Atma, the divine self, is your power station. And your 3 souls are your 3 transformer stations in this example.
Do you talk about what exactly happens in sleep?
Oh, well, yes, in a sense that I've used the analogy with sleep, death is sleep, and how that correlates. But in chapter 5, I described the actual death transition process in considerable detail.
So what then happens? So people, it's one of the things. So fear of death, I think, has dominated fear of ill health.
Fear of death has indeed dominated our culture,
hasn't it, for the last 3 years? And as we're filming this, we've just had the passing of our Queen in Britain. So what does the spiritual and the perennial philosophy, what does it say about what death actually is? And what happens after death? 3
transitions and 4 stages. Right. The first transition is from physical consciousness to astral consciousness. That's the next state of consciousness adjacent to the physical. The second stage is consciousness and existence in the lower post-mortem astral psychic planes. The third stage is consciousness and existence in the higher post-mortem spiritual planes. And the fourth stage is rebirth in a new physical body. So here is the complete human being, man, during earthly life. His physical body built around the etheric double as template, and prana, the life principle. I've kept it all in English, not in Sanskrit, of course, and the desire principle. And here the mind principle acting always as either higher or lower mind, and then intuition and the divine self. Now, at death or after death, we lose all of this. We lose the physical body, etheric double, and life principle. Now, the desire principle and the lower mind form what is known as the karma rupa, the body, the psychic body of thought and desire. So whereas in physical life on earth, the divine self inhabited all of these bodies, the physical body and the subtle bodies. These are subtle bodies, if you like. After death, the divine self is divested of the physical coil and inhabits the karma rupa, the desire nature. And then, just as physical death results in this, there is a second death that occurs, which is so important, where the psychic vestures are then sloughed off. So dying, and just after dying, is the loss of the lower triad, 1, 2, 3, the post-mortem existence in what is known as Kamaloka or Hades, life review and sleep. Kamaloka or Hades or Amenti, all of these terms, and purgatory in Christianity, are all terms referring to a state of consciousness after death where one is given the chance to review our thoughts and actions during life. And rather like a detention room or punishment room at school, we are given the opportunity to progress higher, as indeed we do. So the second death is known as the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. The butterfly emerging is that, and the chrysalis is that.
So what you're pointing to is the divine self and the intuition principle, which is the Buddhi. That's what
yes.
travels on.
Yes, exactly so. So after the psychic vestures are discarded, then we live as our true immortal self in what is known as Devachan, loosely called heaven in Christianity. But Devachan means the plane of the gods, the land of the gods, where all our unfulfilled aspirations and thought are worked out in the mind, so to speak. All our unrequited love, all our impersonal desires are worked out to gain faculty in the next life. So Devachan can be likened to a workshop where all the rough diamonds that were mined during life are given the chance to be polished into fine jewels. And the polishing means converting aspiration into intention and faculty. What draws us back into incarnation is, again, desire, known as tanha and trishna. Tanha is the desire for material existence, and trishna is not only desire for material existence, but desire for being surrounded by what we are familiar with, what we like to associate with. So in this stage, we are born again in Devachan, this realm, a second life review, an awakening before subsequent incarnation on earth. The Christ told Nicodemus, how can a man attain, I'm rephrasing, of course, the kingdom of heaven, unless he be born twice? The first birth, of course, is your physical birth. Your second birth is your birth into the higher realms. There are other interpretations of that, of course.
So I know, Eddie, you said when we're talking about strengthening the bridge, is you talked about having something like I think the words were a searing or a brutally frank life review, or a review of your actions and your intentions. That sounds like an earth version of this process.
Yeah. Exactly. That is extremely well said. Yes, perfect. The more one does this in life, the fewer problems one makes for oneself after death. That is exactly correct. And this is the whole point of one of the meditation exercises which I like to follow, which is reviewing my day, well, in bed, but you review it backwards, not forwards, backwards in time, completely non-judgmentally, just reviewing it and seeing what could have been better, what you did well, and so on. Just to complete the diagram, you have the physical life, the first transition from physical to kamaloka, to the psychic life, psychic planes, the second transition from the astral to the spiritual life. Bearing in mind there is always one stream of consciousness in phase states of itself, like H2O, like ice, water, and steam.
So really, I was thinking when you were first introduced it, if you could just go back to the diagram, you talked about the lower mind and the desire principle coming with you, so to speak. And I had in my head the image of the movie in Scrooge where he is carrying chains. But I think actually a better example may be that you're weighed down with unexpressed and unprocessed learning. So it's almost as if you're carrying a filing cabinet of potential learning and awareness of life on Earth that you haven't processed. And so it's not that you're being punished, it's just that there's work that you need to do in order to come back again because you didn't do it on Earth.
Exactly so, yes. The more psychological baggage you carry with you, the more you've got to process. And the whole phenomenon of apparitions is a huge subject, but a major source of apparitions is the Kamarupa, full of unspent desires and passions, which is attracted to this terrestrial sphere, attracted to situations and people with which it can associate itself.
So what you're saying, so someone's died and their karma rupiah actually manifests as an apparition or as a ghost. What is that right?
Yes, indeed. And the stronger the unfulfilled passions, the more the chance of that manifestation. And that manifestation is artificially exacerbated by mediums. But the other case of the Kamarupa is not people with brutal, strong, and unfulfilled passions, but young people who've been cut off in mid-flight. In mid-flight meaning in full life, like during World War II. There is the book called In Times of War, Wisdom from Soldiers Who Died. And you can understand that a young man who's been sent, say, on D-Day and loses his life, in full life, loses his life, you can understand that the Kamarupa is going to be charged with his love for his mother, his father, his family, his friends, his home, and therefore there will be a manifestation of that Kamarupa invariably in the family bedroom. And that's been shown. So that kind of Kamarupa can be startling to behold, but it's perfectly benign.
Yes. And I guess there you've got a stronger life principle that's still left in the being, right?
Exactly so. There are unspent energies and unspent life principle that's not had time for the life review and the disintegration to occur.
So you talk there about the life review, and that's when people have a near-death experience of when they can literally or physically die, but then come back, they're resuscitated or something like that. And they often say, my life flashed before my eyes.
That is almost a universal statement you've given us. They all talk of going through this tunnel, so to speak, and then they are given a choice whether to carry on that journey or to return to the physical body. And Yes, they say my life flashed before my eyes, and very often the reason for returning is some urgent task left unfulfilled.
But it is an impromptu life review that they're going through. They're brought into this process.
Most certainly. Yes,
Amazing.
most certainly it is, yeah.
Incredible.
But what you said earlier is of crucial importance, to review your life and your day here now. Don't wait for the end.
And what's the spiritual or the benefit of going backwards? You said you go through your day backwards.
Right, that is just reversing time. Because time does funny things. If you go through your day in the order in which events happened, one's more likely to overlay it with one's own imagination. But if you go through your day backwards, each event tends to stand in isolation, and you see it more for what it is, rather than thinking about the next thing that happened. So you're not focusing on what happened.
And I guess as well, it's almost as if you're being more true for a life review, but for a day review, you know how it turned out. So we could have been riddled with anxiety about an important meeting, or let's just say I'm preparing for our second interview and I'm nervous and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, well, I understand. But then if I, at the end of the day, I can look back and knowing that it went well, I can then work on, based on that context and that lens, I can then see what was pertinent about the day.
And what was pertinent and what was significant about the day. Certainly our conversation today is the most significant about today. I can say that quite unambiguously.
You said it was kind of, Devachan was kind of heaven, but not quite.
Well, heaven in the Christian sense is a place of eternal bliss. It's not eternal. It's temporary, but from our standpoint, very, very considerably longer than life on earth. Time has a very, very different connotation, as in dreams. What can seem years in a dream is really a twinkling of a physical eye.
Yeah, and I guess, and if something comes from a higher place into the lower physical, then the physical part of it doesn't work the way that it would normally work on physical. And I know people, when they share stories of psychedelic experiences, which I know you're not such a fan of, but there can be a tremendous physical aspect to that, which other people can't see or experience, so that this energy coming through, and I guess again why you say to be very careful with those kind of things, is the energy coming through consciousness into you can do it can do a lot of harm to the physical body, because it hasn't got the transformers to protect you, has it?
It hasn't got the transformers, it hasn't got the safeguards, and it hasn't got the safety valves. And the electrical protection circuits. Yes, that's very well put. Yes.
And Eddie, you were saying that so for people that have lived or for want of a better word, an evil life, or that they often do they go through any of this process, or do they go straight back to?
Well, if the evil is 100%, then no. But if there's even a wisp of spirituality, then the time in the after-death states is entirely proportional to the degree to which you have energized your spiritual life or not.
Amazing. So within all these things, then I know you make a distinction in the book, and I do hope that the viewers are seeing that there is so much in your books, Eddie. It's just outrageous, and you're answering questions that I've had for a long time. And like I say, in self-help, we know that writing stuff down makes a difference, and you explained exactly, using the perennial philosophy, exactly how that works. But you make a difference. You talk about immortality, infinity, and eternity.
Yes.
I just wondered if you could explain to us the difference.
Yes, immortality is still in the realm of time. Eternity is outside time. So death and immortality are the two opposite poles of the ending of, or the reduction of time to its minimal, and immortality, the expansion of time to its maximum. But eternity is outside time. And Isaac Newton deals with this in the most sublime and incredible way in his Principia, in the General Scholium. Equally, endurance and endure are not exactly the same thing. He refers to the divine being, he not as endurance, but he endures. It's amazing reading, which I thoroughly recommend.
And that's Isaac Newton's Principia
Yes,
mathematics.
Absolutely, which everyone's heard of, and I would say very few people have bothered to read and understand in its esoteric and religious import.
And that's one of the books that you had in your house, wasn't it, when we went on your table, as I recall?
Definitely, yes. I've got a couple of editions, yeah.
Wow. One of the chapters, Eddie, in your book is number 7, Is the Brain a Wet Computer? Are humans lumbering robots? And you then controversially, you say the closing of the scientific mind.
Yes.
I just wonder if you could answer that question that you phrased, is the brain basically a computer, and are we essentially robots?
No. But the brain displays aspects of a computer. We can behave like lumbering robots, but that doesn't mean we are lumbering robots.
So what's been your research and experience in this field, and how can we take the listeners and the viewers through it?
Right. Well, firstly, let's understand what a computer is, and I've put out some definitions from various technical journals and description and academic books and dictionaries, where the central point that comes across is a computer is a machine that needs a programmer. So however you look at a computer, it needs a programmer. So that's the first point. But the reason why this idea is gaining traction is because of the tremendous advances in computing power and technology. There is this mistaken notion that mind is to brain as software is to hardware. So that's their sort of master analogy. Mind is to brain as software is to hardware. And the way they demolish any notion of subjectivity is firstly to argue that man is just a computer and nothing more, by ignoring everything that distinguishes a man from a computer, and then eliminating all feelings and subjective states, or rather reducing all subjectivity to the physical. And then if it can't be measured, of course, it doesn't exist. So their sort of three-pronged attack or approach is roboticism, functionalism, and brain states. This is what they argue. And they meaning top-level professors and neuroscientists and computationalists like Ray Kurzweil, who invented voice recognition, Daniel Dennett, of course, who would not have anything to do with subjective states and consciousness. So this is their argument.
Do you know, Eddie, one of the things I'm just noticing now is how in our language, objective is seen as being vastly superior to subjective. And we're educated to avoid subjective at all times. And in science, unless you can state something as an objective fact, then you're not allowed to talk about it. And if you do, then you're obviously not a scientist, and so we should ignore you. That
is incredibly well put, Jonathan. Yes. Earlier we were talking of the distinction between primary qualities and secondary qualities. primary qualities. That objective can be measured, weighed, the see-touch feeling realism, and subjective, relegated to the realm of opinion and feeling. And our entire education is to put objectivity on a superior level.
Amazing. And so it's essentially what you're saying. It is actually a brainwashing, isn't it? And we're trying to,
Yeah.
and it's like we're moving away from that which makes us most human.
Yes.
And of our universal or most spiritual as well, which is the experiential or the subjective experience. That's right. That's reflected upon, obviously. Goodness, and to focus on inferior states.
And you can see the difference between objective and subjective, or objective and phenomena, very simply by realizing you can put a computer in a box, but you can't put a rainbow in a box, because a rainbow is not objective. It's a phenomena. It's a phenomena created by the laws of refraction of light and our own eyes and brains and minds. So you can't put a rainbow in a box.
But and a rainbow it's a relationship, isn't it? It's a relationship between different things in an environment.
It's a phenomenon. So it's subjective in that sense. If you go up in a balloon, hot air balloon, well, you wouldn't have a rainbow then with hot air. But anyway, you can't touch a rainbow. You can only touch water droplets. It's a phenomenon. So we have overemphasized the objective. In Ian McGilchrist terms, we have overemphasized the left brain as opposed to the right brain, which is far more holistic in its purview. So the next slide is we implement this strategy in this way.
So this is the roboticism, functionalism, and then
and brain states.
And how the brain states, they cause emotions.
That's right.
Rather than the other way around.
Yeah. But to say that if you don't have your physical senses, you can't experience anything, is completely shot to pieces. That's the good news in inverted commas by top Google scientist.
So what you're saying is, sorry, just go back there, because just if someone is still listening, and if you are listening, please get onto YouTube and look at the diagrams. But you're saying in 2029, according to Ray Kurzweil, computers will outsmart us, and the behavior of computers will be indistinguishable from that of humans, which is the Turing. Well, it's more than the Turing test, actually, isn't it? Because that's actually if a human would be tricked to believe that a computer was human.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not the same. But 2045, machine intelligence will dominate human intelligence to such an extent that humans will no longer be capable of understanding machines. Right. So what you're saying there is the machine transcends the programmer.
That's right. The machine literally transcends the programmer. And this great lady, Helen Keller, completely without hearing or eyesight, was able to describe Beethoven's choral symphony by touching the loudspeaker off her gramophone.
And Helen Keller was also deaf, right, as well as blind.
Completely deaf and blind, showing that there are subtle senses within the human being that science has just bothered not to investigate.
Yes. So let me just see if I've got any more questions on. So we're talking really about the idea that that artificial intelligence as well is becoming sentient, and it's becoming a threat to humanity.
Well, is it sentient? Because everything starts with the programmer, and there are all sorts of things that this computationalist analogy can't possibly explain.
And so what you're really saying then is so in terms of, in popular culture, the Terminator, where the machines take over, or in so many other sci-fi movies where the machine, to protect the human, they take over because the human can't be trusted.
Mm.
What you're actually saying is not, we don't have to worry about artificial intelligence in itself, but we do, I think, need to be worried about the people controlling and having the artificial intelligence programmed and what they might have in mind.
Exactly
right?
so.
Which I don't know if you know, Eddie, that the Luddites. Do you remember the Luddites? Well,
Yeah.
have you heard of them? So the story is that the Luddites they protested the introduction of using machines for industrial purposes. And when you actually look at what they read and said, they had no problem with introducing the machines. What they had a problem with was who owned the machines,
who
owned the output that they produced when they had the machine. And that's what the fight was over. But in the history got rewritten to say that it was the Luddites were against progress, when actually what they were against was not necessarily benevolent people controlling machines, which would then
what kind
their
of
lives,
progress?
right? Which I guess is a model for AI, isn't it? Is that people could use AI to damage our lives, but it's not the AI that's doing it; it's the people controlling the AI.
It's never the AI, it's never the technology, it's the people behind it. You're absolutely right. And the other crucial difference between computer thinking, so AI, and human thinking is necessarily metaphorical. I mean, this was argued very brilliantly by one of the American professors of philosophy, that computers don't think metaphorically. He showed how metaphorical ideas affect how we act, and how metaphorical thought and understanding of situation arises independently of language. Whereas computers have electrical circuitry, they don't have metaphoric circuitry.
Yeah, interesting. Is there anything more you'd like to say about computers?
Oh, only in that the threat is very real, and in many ways they are degrading our ability to think deeply and logically, because when everything is done by a computer, the human element of judgment and perception is downgraded, because you think the computer did it, it must be right. Well, of course, it may not be right at all. So my disquiet is only the increasing mechanization of our lives. There was a recent letter to the Times that from a lady saying, at one time when I wanted to go on a train, I looked at one timetable. Now there are 8 apps. Now, do you need 8 apps to find a train timetable? Also, and I must confess, of course, I use my sat nav, but I try my best for a journey that's not too complicated to use a map, because that way you maintain your mental skills. If you rely on a sat nav, you can be in zombie mode, and if your sat nav fails, you're lost.
Yes,
just minimize the use of computers. That's all I would say. Necessary and minimize, but now it's maximize.
What you also talk in this chapter, Eddie, is the closing of the scientific mind, the inviolability of materialistic theories. And I know, I'm guessing, if the neo-Darwinist and materialist scientists actually lowered themselves to listen to what we're talking about, and given the vitriol that they spewed on people like Rupert Sheldrake, Thomas Nagel, Aben Alexander, what have you got to? What would you to say to prepare? To be ready for that attack?
Yes, I would say very clearly that the very fact that you attack shows the weakness of your argument. That you can state whatever you like in forceful, and clear terms, nothing, and passionate terms, nothing wrong with that. But the desire to attack shows a fundamental weakness. It shows your fear, and it shows that deep down, you really believe what you're attacking, but because what you're attacking destroys your own ego and your own position in the university or whatever, you feel the need to destroy it. The more you attack, the weaker your position.
Well, and also as well, the less scientific, by definition,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because if you were actually being a scientist, what you'd try to find out would be curious about the ideas and see if there are any ideas that can add to yours and improve on yours.
David Deutsch, leading quantum physicist at Oxford, commenting or attacking Brian Josephson, Nobel laureate, his ideas on telepathy, which he just put forward as a hypothesis. Telepathy is utter rubbish. Well, anyone can say that. You can get a parrot to say it. There's nothing scientific about that. But he never says why it's rubbish. It's just a crude attack. And as far as the attack on religion goes, my gosh.
Yes. So is there anything more you want to say about computers or why we're not, humans are not basically flawed computers?
Because computers were made by man, not the other way around.
Yes. So Eddie, just the final one of the most extraordinary chapters in the book. If you can finish on this. So you go through all the ancient teachings and then you also in I think chapter 8, you actually talk about the harmony within different world teachings.
Yes.
I just wonder if you could give us a brief summary of the extraordinary connections you make in that chapter, because that was the one that I actually enjoyed that the most when I was reading it the first time, because I actually could link it to all the other things that I'd read and listened to. Really, just you go through all the Eastern doctrines, Western, Plato, Egypt, Zoroastrian, and then also you go all the way on to
the modern ones. It's very important to consider the modern. Ken Wilber and
Ken Wilber and Gurdjieff, who's the early 20th century.
That's right.
And just the most extraordnary an Aurobindo as well, which
that's right.
Which was just extraordinary. Do you happen to have that diagram? It might be too much to share.
Yes, but not here.
Okay.
But you've got another meeting, haven't you?
I have. I do need to finish, unfortunately. So that, I guess, would be an enticement for people to to get hold of the book. Is there anything that you'd like, just to, if you want to stop sharing the screen, then we can just have
Let me just say that the diagram you're referring to, I was inspired by Leibniz, who is another one of my great inspirers, where he said most philosophical schools diminish themselves by adopting the sectarian spirit. So there is far more that unites different philosophies and far less that divides them, but they keep harping on what divides them. And so he recommended Leibniz a framework of harmony, a framework of philosophers. And I've used in that diagram the analogy of white light. That's the divine wisdom. Now, we can't see white light, but we can see it by interposing a diverging lens. A diverging lens splits it into the various colors. Now, each color, let's say, represents a particular teaching, a particular sage, a particular scientist. These streams, the different color streams, are not independent. They've come from the white light. But our job as thinking human beings is to combine these colored streams and reproduce the white light. And we recombine the white streams by interposing a converging lens. So the diverging lens splits the white light, and this was Newton's famous experiment. But the converging lens brings the various colored streams, the various teachings, back together to make white light again. So as above, so below. So that is the reconciling framework of harmony.
And given that we've got so much divisiveness going on, I think that what did you call it? The reconciling?
A reconciling framework of harmony.
What a wonderful phrase.
Yeah. So it's not a question of believing or disbelieving. It's exactly bringing the colored streams together to see their point of origin.
Yes, and I've seen the prism and the rainbow effects so many times. I've never thought about reversing it, of bringing everything back into the one beam, and like you say, just what unites us and how to bring harmony to the to all the different streams. That's fantastic. Well, Eddie, is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners and viewers before we finish up this part 2 of our series of your extraordinary work?
Oh, thanks. I'll only say what I keep saying to myself. The more you realize how little you are, the sooner you will rise to your greater self. So here, what I'm getting at is the more you realize how important it is to keep the ego in abeyance, the more you will create space for the divine light to come through.
Eddie, thank you very much as always.
Jonathan, thank you so much for your hard work and preparation. Most sincerely appreciated.
Thanks, Eddie.
You, Jonathan. Thanks very much. Yeah, all the best.
Thank you for listening to the Shepheard-Walwyn podcast. To explore these ideas further, be sure to visit our website www.shepheard-walwyn.com and join our mailing list for news and special offers. Check out our authors and buy the books to learn more. And you can also find us on social media. Links are also on the website. And if you like the podcast, please head over to iTunes or Spotify to give us a review. It's surprisingly helpful in getting the ideas out there. So until next time, keep reading